Now, to go deeper into what this new DTC playbook might look like in practice, I'm pleased to welcome three entrepreneurs who are forging a new direct-to-consumer model. Based in LA, Claudia, Teng, and Olamide Olowe are the co-founders of Topicals, a skincare brand whose products are targeted at the 1 in 4 Americans who experience chronic skin conditions such as eczema and hyperpigmentation. And also in LA, we have Cami Téllez, the founder and chief executive of Parade, mentioned just in our presentation just now, a community-first underwear brand for women. Both companies have bucked the trend in venture capital fundraising. They're led by women of color who've raised millions of dollars in an industry that's traditionally overlooked opportunities in women's lifestyle and wellness brands. Claudia, Olamide, and Cami will be in conversation with our senior editorial associate, Alexandra Mondelek, who's in Naples, Florida today. Over to you, Alex.
Thank you so much, Imran, and welcome again, everyone. I'm so excited to talk to you today.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you, Alex.
Yeah,
really
my pleasure.
excited.
So let's just jump right in, thinking about some of the earliest generation of direct-to-consumer brands, some of whom whose founders are investors or have mentored each of you. And, you don't necessarily think that the eyewear market was ripe for disruption when we think about, say, Warby Parker. So how do you think about shaking up either underwear or skincare when it comes to Parade and Topicals? Cami, why don't you start?
Yeah, so I came into this market actually deeply understanding that we were in the midst of the DTC revolution. Warby Parker, Casper, and Away are all phenomenal companies, and lucky to count all of those founders as investors in Parade. They were all built in a different landscape for a different customer. We now know that branding is about creatively finding where she is and centering around reintroducing the customer to self-expression. So fundamentally for us, I think I came into the category knowing that this was a $17 billion market in crisis. I grew up going to the mall, seeing supermodels blown up on massive storefronts, and knowing that there was a massive disconnect with the way that Victoria's Secret, who still owns a third of the market, saw their kind of product and brand story. I believe inherently that brands write cultural scripts, and I'm excited that we're running Parade at a cultural moment that no longer embraces that one note idea of sexiness. Fundamentally at Parade, we believe in underwear as a connective tissue between bodies, which are political, and style, which is creative. And so this fundamentally means that it's an incredibly dynamic space. It's filled with potential. At our core, really, we believe that, Parade is rewriting the American underwear story in full technicolor. And what that means, I think, is on one side, we had brands like Victoria's Secret that were, hot pink, over-sexualized, and really had one kind of a very one-note idea of what femininity meant. And then on the other side, we had brands, for example, like Third Love or Lively, that were really focused on creating a very kind of nude and bland and desexualized expression for women. I think fundamentally we've kind of taken an approach that is, taking a step back and centers the idea that women and feminine identifying people are, bold, expressive, and freewheeling. And when we start with that kind of core assumption, I think everything else throughout the entire kind of expression of the brand kind of ladders back to, a completely new type of underwear brand. That has, in a year been able to kind of start to shift the category for the better.
Mm.
Yeah, I 100% agree with Cami. I think in our own category, we thought about it two ways. Both Claudia and I grew up with chronic skin conditions and never saw ourselves represented in the beauty story, whether that be because we were women of color or because we had chronic skin conditions. And then my previous background of starting a tween brand for Shea Moisture, which is one of the largest multicultural beauty brands in the world, I learned this idea of how retail is merchandised. And when retail is merchandised a certain way, it kind of grooms customers to believe certain things about certain categories. And so we saw in the hair care space with Shea Moisture, there was an ethnic hair care aisle and a hair care aisle. And we saw that there was this kind of division of the two. And when Claudia and I looked at the skincare aisle, we saw the same thing. There was the beauty skincare aisle, which was fun. The packaging was fun. The products were enticing. People wanted to tell their friends about it. And then we saw the chronic skincare aisle, where a bunch of people have these skin conditions, but their experience is quite sterile and bland, and their product experience was lackluster. And so Claudia and I took those two experiences and birthed Topicals. And so with Topicals, we're trying to transform the way people feel about skin by taking the focus off of perfect skin and celebrating the fun of flare-ups.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think both of your brands, Topicals and Parade, really stand out to me when I'm scrolling my Instagram page. So to me, that's the signal that you've sort of bucked this bland millennial aesthetic. But I would love to hear a little bit more from each of you about how you avoid those cliches in that blanding millennial aesthetic for each of your own brands, and what really resonates with your consumer.
Yeah, so I think fundamentally, at the core, I was 21 when I started this brand. And so much of the inspiration and direction for Parade was distilled from my own lived experiences. And I think that being the customer is a massive advantage. I know her better than anyone else because in many ways I am her. And it's actually something that Olamide and I speak often about. I think at our very core, when we're thinking about the building blocks of the brand, so much of Generation 1 was built by a very similar group of people, branding agencies that were kind of coming in as almost strangers to category, strangers to founders' perspective, and building something that that was what they saw as a solution. And I think more broadly, when we take a step back, I think that Olamide and I, and Claudia and I, all of our brands are kind of centered on reintroducing the customer to the idea of how they engage with this product and this category as a whole. We're thinking about how we can spark, I think, a new interaction that's really based on self-expression. And I think what Claudia said, or what Olamide said around fun, I think is critical for us. And I think at Parade, we're always thinking about fun. We really believe that fun is an underutilized emotion in brands. And we're looking always to engineer more wonder within our brand continuum. From the inception of Parade, I think we've set out to do everything differently and reinvent how digital brands look, feel, sound, act, and play. And I think at the very core, that begins with the kind of journey to launch and how you kind of build a team of both, people working on the visual language of the brand, and also people who are working on, the tone and the voice. And I think for us, what we've learned is that really has to come from, internally. That has to come from the founders themselves to be able to consistently build a brand voice that feels new, and it feels that it can fundamentally kind of, rewrite a customer's interaction.
Yeah, I think Cami touched on something that's really important at Topicals as well, which is that difference in perspective is so important. And I think that what Olamide and I really value at Topicals, for example, is bringing a different perspective to the way that people experience the beauty community. And I think that difference in perspective and really being one of our own customers, one of our own, a member of our own community, is it allows us to approach, I think, speaking authentically with our community in a different kind of way.
Mm-hmm. What does speaking authentically with your community look like? What tools are you using? What platforms are working for each of your brands? Is it enough to be posting cute photos on Instagram with like a cheeky caption? How are you thinking about all of that community building effort?
Yeah, I'm happy to go first. So I think fundamentally we started Parade knowing that one of the core pieces of the direct consumer landscape was that, Generation 1 was very centered on thinking about, paid channels as a core way to grow. And for us, we really realized that we had to focus more on community and organic first methods to be able to build a brand that was sustainable and lasted beyond 2 to 3 years to really 10 years. And I think that in that, we also really believed that, while Victoria's Secret had a very top-down way of building influence, Parade had to really center on a grassroots approach. And so community at our very core is, we have over 4,000 ambassadors. We're one of the biggest communities of any DTC brand. These are women and gender-identifying people and queer people, that are really in all 50 states and come from all sorts of different communities and backgrounds. And I think that, having these kind of like viral and dense, communities that we can kind of come into really comes down to kind of how we activate them. And for us, so much of our model is really centered around drops. So taking our kind of existing sustainable fabric platforms and centering them on kind of like new kind of ideas and new, new brand moments. So from anything like Technicolor, which was a full LGBTQ campaign, to an ice cream inspired collection, to, sort of kind of Swarovski collaboration, we've been able to kind of consistently, and I think serialistically, I think to your point, I think brands today have to, look a lot more like media companies. They have to be able to create threads and create kind of ways of interacting with their customer that go way beyond just a single UGC post. You have to be able to create kind of rich content. And I think for us, one of the biggest pieces in both of our brands are both, both categories where people have emotional stories to share. And I think, specifically in underwear, everyone has a sort of upbringing and some sort of story of going to the mall, trying on the first bra. And I think that for us, one of the biggest themes we've been able to pull through is, what is your underwear story? And being able to share that from anything from an influencer to, a social justice kind of like activist to a member of our community to me as a CEO, I think continuing to kind of bring forward and pull forward the true themes across vulnerability and like self-expression, I think has been very successful for us.
Yeah, I would really agree with Claudia. With Cami, in that our brand story really did start with what the consumer behavior was and what their experience was. And so we started with the fact that this person has always been an outsider. And so for us, we build stories around the fact that, we'll build stories around the fact that our customer has been left out. And so what we do is we retransform moments from the early 2000s, which is when our customer grew up. We like to say we're remixing the pages of 17 magazine or of different magazines that you grew up looking at. And so for us, what we've done to kind of, I think like Cami said, have this drop model where it's something fresh and new and really pushing the envelope with the customer is that we've done somewhat of like marketing drops. So back in October, for October 3rd, we launched a burn book that was, instead of talking bad about people, we turned it on its head and made it talking about beauty standards we wish never existed. And then as of recently on Black Friday, we dropped a set of conversation cards with our products for people to unlearn toxic beauty standards. And so really what we want our customers to be able to do is to have conversation amongst themselves and with us as a brand about how they want to change the narrative that has been said in the past. And I think Cami brilliantly said this with the fact that brands create cultural scripts or cultural narratives. We truly believe that. And we feel like, I think Cami, Claudia, and I feel that our brands are going to be able to rewrite a whole narrative and create this new industry in our own respective industries and a new story that our customer can be proud of.
Absolutely. Well, I, again, just want to thank each of you for joining in today and sharing your insights here. And I'm excited to see what fun, inventive ways you keep your communities engaged. And with that, I will throw it over to Imran in the studio.
Thank you, Cami, Olamide, Claudia, and of course to Alex for your time today.